all for being here today for a couple of reasons. One, the topic is kind of, it's what it is. Topic's tough. But also it's the last day, so you guys are probably weary, but I'm grateful you're here. My name's Tricia Lewis, and today this is our topic. There's notes if you want to grab them, and also an evaluation, even if you don't fill it out, like to evaluate me. If there's a comment or a question or want to connect further, please feel free to write on that. I love to connect with you in the days to come. That'd be very exciting. So before I begin this topic, restoring hope and healing for those impacted by reproductive trauma, I just have a couple things. The first is that while you are all medical professionals in some way, you meet needs of people coming in and things like that, I have found every time I give a talk like this, people are generally more impacted. Some people are generally more impacted than they think they might be because of the definition of reproductive grief that I offer. It's pretty wide and varied, and so please feel free to grab notes too. There's some on chairs if you'd like. It might be helpful for you. And so I just want to let you know before we begin, be gentle on yourself. If you find that, maybe you've considered, I've never known anybody with reproductive loss before, and then all of a sudden it occurs to you, I actually really did, and that really impacted me. Or maybe you had a reproductive loss in your past, and you thought, well, it's in the past, and I've kind of dealt with it. Or maybe you felt like I've gone through healing. The Lord has handled that in my life. It's in a good place. I'm in a good place with it, and still it can spark sometimes a difficult response. So I just want to let you know that. Additionally, I also know that while we're aware that abortion and other types of losses occur differently, we do know that how people grieve is similar, and so that's kind of the place we're coming from today, not talking about one over the other, that kind of a thing. And then third, I really want you to know that by virtue of you being here today, you will help your patients have growth in their and healing. Just by, I always say, lifting the chin, by just looking around you, by learning just even a little bit, and maybe some of you are well versed in this. I was just talking to a group in the back, and I talk about this all the time. But if you're not familiar, you've already won the biggest battle here today by just becoming aware. So the goals that we have in store today for you are to increase your awareness of the impact of reproductive trauma and hiding post-traumatic growth that can occur by helping your patient understand reproductive grief and loss basics, embrace biblical principles for grief, and finding support. And of course, and I'll talk about this just a little bit more further, but post-traumatic growth is that theory that holds that people who endure psychological struggle following adversity can often see growth afterwards, just to start us off. I love this quote as well by Thelma Niehaus. She writes, "The grief did not dissipate in the face of joy. Instead, I found them dwelling together within me, sharing space comfortably in a way I could not have envisioned. I remain childless, but there is joy here." And that will kind of kick us off today. All right, let's get going. If you haven't gotten notes, please feel free to grab some there on chairs. Okay, so reproductive loss affects a significant number of individuals, with domestic estimates indicating over 2.4 million pregnancy losses annually. And despite the prevalence of this, there exists a noticeable silence surrounding the emotional toll of these losses. They're disenfranchised in nature. Familiar with Kenneth Doka, he talks a lot about disenfranchised grief that's not socially acceptable or outward. People don't deal with it in a social or cultural way that's easy for us sometimes. It's quiet. Healthcare professionals are often first responders when these losses occur, yet research suggests that many feel ill-prepared to navigate perinatal bereavement conversations. Sometimes it's really tough. Research suggests that due to the frequency of pregnancy loss, healthcare providers may also become desensitized to such events, particularly when they occur early in gestation, leading to sometimes just even forgetting to bring it up on subsequent visits. If it's early miscarriage, they just may go unnoticed, untalked about, not memorable to the healthcare professional. And additionally, providers specializing in maternal child care typically prioritize, rightly so, fostering wellness or pregnancy success, making the emotional trauma of pregnancy loss particularly challenging, especially in the absence of adequate training in end-of-life and perinatal bereavement care. But with even just a little bit, that's why I said, even just a little bit of education and support, you can incorporate compassionate approaches to grief, which can spur healing and growth in those enduring grief from reproductive loss. And again, for those of you coming in, there are notes at the end of seats, so feel free to grab those if I do a lot of statistics in this. Okay, so a broad definition of reproductive loss. Reproductive loss refers to experiences of miscarriage, stillbirth, and perinatal and infant death, the loss of normal reproductive experiences such as those associated with infertility, assisted reproductive technology, and abortion. It also includes adoption, babies born with birth defects or learning disabilities, and any loss related to a person's reproductive health. I was on an airplane with my colleague, and we were going to another conference, going to be teaching, and this beautiful young woman sat next to us at the end of the aisle of the airplane, and she asked what we were doing, and so we explained, and she kind of looked off into nowhere. She was trying to process this weird thing that we talk about all the time, and she said, like miscarriage and abortion, things like that. And we said yes, and she was quiet for some time, and then she turned to my colleague and she said, hysterectomy? And my colleague said yes. And she went on to tell about how, as a young woman, she had to have a full hysterectomy, and now she was grieving the loss of biological children she would never have. So when we're considering reproductive loss, it's quite broad. Reproductive loss encompasses a wide range of experiences related to a person's reproductive health and decisions. So essentially, reproductive loss is any experience of grief in a person's life related to their ability to have children, the outcomes of a pregnancy, or the creation or care of their family. Does that make sense so far? Is that good? Okay. So let's look at how common it is. Miscarriage, we know that about 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. 1 in 175 pregnancies ends in stillbirth. Infertility affects up to 1 in 5 couples. Abortion, we know 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the age 45. And then here I have abortion pill reversal. Over 5,000 babies saved through the abortion pill reversal process within the last 8 years. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, how can that be a reproductive loss? So for those of you who don't think about this all the time, we're just going to take a tiny little journey down what abortion pill reversal is. So the chemical abortion is a termination protocol, and over half of abortions in the U.S. today are chemical abortions. This process involves taking 2 different drugs. I'm sure all of you, I'm singing to the choir, but mifepristone and misoprostol that can be used up to 10 to 12 weeks of pregnancy. Mifepristone is the drug that blocks progesterone needed for pregnancy to continue, and the second drug, misoprostol, induces labor. Okay? So if a woman chooses not to terminate her pregnancy after taking the first drug, a protocol called the abortion pill reversal can reverse the abortion process by introducing a large influx of progesterone back into the pregnant woman's system. Mifepristone blocks the progesterone that would normally be absorbed, so an influx of progesterone can outcompete for the available binding spaces. Now, according to the Abortion Pill Rescue Network, there have been successful reversals when treatment was started within 72 hours of taking the first abortion pill. Okay? So, with that said, you're thinking, how does that impact, how is this impacting in this slide? Consider the emotional impact of a woman who first finds herself in an unplanned pregnancy, decides to terminate her pregnancy only to change her mind and fight for her baby's life with the reversal. Her baby then has approximately a 64 to 68% chance of life at that point. Okay, and so the baby may live or may die. All right, and so all of these decisions, imagine this woman walking in your door, all of these decisions have been made in a short amount of time, perhaps with little information or support, and the grief and loss impact here can be quite complex. Does that make sense? Okay. Then 67% of pregnancies with adverse prenatal diagnosis are terminated, and adoption losses. I just had somebody call me just the other day who the adoption was a failed adoption. The birth mother chose not to place her baby, and the adoptive parents had already bonded in their mind to this little life, and she was distraught. She didn't even know where to put her grief, right? So while adoption is super cool and should be celebrated all the time, we do know that it includes losses for birth parents, adoptive parents, and children. Okay, so reproductive trauma. Studies have shown that experiencing reproductive loss and the resulting grief can lead to significant emotional trauma that may persist over time and have negative effects on various aspects of a person's life. The impact of this loss is not solely determined by the gestational age of the fetus, but rather by the emotional attachment, hopes, and dreams that the parents have for their child. And I'm not saying this particular part, it's regarding healthcare providers maybe sometimes offering insensitive and dismissive reactions that can exacerbate the distress and trauma experienced. I often say I've said all the wrong things. So it's not just healthcare providers, it's people who just don't know. We are well-meaning, big-hearted people who just simply don't know what to say or where to put our compassion. But healthcare providers have a big impact, as you can imagine. So early pregnancy losses are people who have them are more vulnerable to being disenfranchised, unacknowledged, or dismissed because of the ambiguous nature of the loss. Consider miscarriage or infertility. People walk around all the time struggling with both, and you may never know, right? And especially when they walk into our offices, if we're not asking good questions or right questions or questions that try and find this out, then they're simply going unnoticed. The reactions of professional caregivers to the loss do, in fact, impact the grief experience of their patients. The patient is in unfamiliar territory and taking their cues from what's happening around them, trying to gauge a proportionate response. They don't know. This is completely uncharted for them. So disenfranchisement of one's grief can lead to trauma in that loss. Also, just because something is common doesn't mean it's simple to manage, right? Recent research through a scoping review highlights that a considerable portion of parents who have undergone prenatal loss, regardless of gestational age, meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder with rates of 60%, as high as 60% in some studies. And with all reproductive loss, you can read just about any study, we know that there are high cases of guilt, shame, isolation, men, women. It's very common on all losses. You might say, oh, with abortion, I could see that. But it's in all cases that there's a high statistic in men and women. And in addition to the losses of an anticipated child, perinatal loss also involves an existential crisis, disrupting a parent's fundamental belief about what gives life meaning. Does that make sense? Is that tracking? Any questions so far? Make sure I know I'm shoving a lot at you. Okay. So what helped me a lot process this topic was Dr. Jaffe writes about the reproductive story. Kind of wraps all these statistics in something understandable, I believe. The reproductive story provides a distinct perspective to understand both pregnancy loss and infertility. Essentially, a reproductive story is sometimes conscious, but largely unconscious narratives of what a person believes their children will be like and what they will be like as parents. So everyone has a reproductive story. Everyone. The reproductive story is one of the many narratives that make up who we are. According to Jaffe and Diamond, the details of the individual reproductive stories may differ. However, most expect the story to unfold without a hitch and have a happy ever after with a happy baby in one's arms. So Dr. Jaffe writes this. She says, as a clinician who specializes in reproductive issues, I have heard a wide range of stories from women over the years, some of whom proclaim, I always knew I wanted to be a mom. Even as a little girl, that was what I wanted to be. I even decided to become a teacher so I would have the same schedule as my kids. Some that were more vague wrote, I just thought I would have kids someday. And to some that were more ambivalent, that I didn't think I wanted kids, and then one day it hit me. I hope it's not too late. Dr. Jaffe continues, these stories often begin in childhood as we ourselves are parented. The stories evolve over time, and the subtle changes that are made to the narrative become subtly yet implicitly assimilated. It's when the story abruptly goes off course when a woman can't have children, how and when she wants to, that traumatic loss occurs. She continues to state that the reproductive story is so intertwined with one's sense of self that when hopes and dreams are not realized, one may be traumatized, feeling as if one is failing to live up to one's own expectations. Regardless of the type of reproductive loss, a crisis in the reproductive story shakes at the very foundation of one's identity and is experienced by both men and women. Does that make sense? Now, I want you guys all, because we're going to do an activity here in just a second, but start thinking about your childhood story a little bit in the back of your mind. What were some things that you hoped and planned for when you were a child? So before we do that, we're going to do a case study. We're going to talk about Blair. Blair is an actual person on the interweb who actually blogged about her desire to be a mother. It's in your notes, so I'll just read it really quickly here. She says, I graduated from college with an excellent degree and got a job that not only pays the bills but teaches me. But what it all boils down for me is this. My only real dream is to be a mom, the only one, and I'm an unmarried college graduate. I have other dreams, like to become a published author or to blog full-time, to renovate and fix up an old house, but the truth is, it's something I've known for years, probably since I was 8 or 9 years old. It's like God planted a seed deep in my heart, one that has swollen and sprouted throughout my life, one that whispers your life purpose is to become a mother. It's something I've only embraced halfway because the society we live in allows for nothing less than a powerful businesswoman, successful and highly educated and with power suits. And it's to those women I say thank you. Thank you for changing the world and breaking down barriers and stereotypes and glass ceilings. But I feel compelled to speak on behalf of other women, the women like me who have a gut feeling that their true calling is to raise babies. I feel compelled to say our dream is just as valid. My soul would absolutely crumble if I never have the chance to become a mother, whether biologically or through adoption or both. I believe it was what I was born to do. And even though there's no way that I could predict now what God has for me in the future, I am absolutely positive that he will make me a mother in his way, in his time, according to his plan. I have a deep-rooted passion for becoming a mom, even though I'm not married yet. Okay. This is a real person who wrote something really important on her blog. Tell me, if you can decipher it, what is Blair's main goal in her world? To be a mom. She says it so many times, doesn't she? And how long has she wanted this? Since she was like 8 or 9 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And how does she state she will feel if she doesn't have children? You see that in there? Her soul will absolutely crumble. So you can see where we're talking about that childhood story. We are starting to bond with children, ideas, dreams, hopes, well before we even consider it anything, right? We start to plan it. So the reproductive story is not new in the Bible. It's a biblical idea too. The Bible has long held the theological premise that man's heart was created to long for God, and in this endeavor, our hearts tend to wander and long for all sorts of things that he may or may not, that may or may not be what his plan is for us. The Bible says, Proverbs 16:9, the heart of man plans his ways. A reproductive story, we plan our ways, but the Lord establishes his steps. And then we can see in the reproductive story, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So many of us from a young age have this picture of what we imagine our life will look like. And at Reproductive Loss Network, we talk a lot about it as the childhood story. We like how Trevin Wax, in this quote, talks about it. He says, he describes it. From the first memories of childhood, we recall dreams, hopes, and ideas about how we expect our lives will turn out. These stories we imagine often come from a place of innocence or pain, dreamt from early experiences, family rituals, cultural impact, and other influences. It is the narrative that gives shape and significance to your life. And he mentions here a place of innocence, but we also added a place of pain because any abuse or sense of danger in life can have a negative impact on someone's story. Many of the people we talk to, women and men, talk about childhood sexual abuse and other types of abuse, and they don't remember having a childhood story at all. They just remember having more of survived, which maybe some of you have experienced with your patients. And so, but the absence of a story is just as impactful in how someone lives and processes the events in their lives as someone who has had developed a robust expectation for their future. So it's a thriving story versus a surviving story, but nonetheless, it's a story, right? So really quickly, we're just going to take, honestly, like a minute. We're going to talk about your reproductive story. So what were your dreams, hopes, expectations when you were growing up? For instance, maybe you dreamed of having 2 little girls and a golden retriever, and maybe you were never going to make your daughters eat broccoli, and they could stay out in the rain all day long. Okay, so just kind of consider, just take one quick minute to kind of consider what you're, okay, one whole minute for that. I know that's not a lot of time. You can think about it on your drive home or your flight home today too. Now, without, I don't want anyone to think we're doing therapy here. I'm not qualified. I'm sure someone here is, but not me. Would anybody like to share what their childhood story was like when they were a kid? Yes.
So, my name is Katina.
Hi, Katina.
When I was a little girl, I was 8 years old before my mom had my brother. So I was kind of like the only child in the house, and I remember feeling so lonely. Like, I'm gonna have a whole bunch of kids when I get big. I don't have a sister to talk to.
Right.
I had sisters by my dad, but they didn't live in the house with me, so it was just me and mom. And I remember feeling like I wanted a lot of children. And so that was my dream, to have like 8, maybe 8 children. Like, I was like, I just want a big family. And the reason behind that was that I felt like if you had a lot of siblings, you didn't have to go outside of your family. You could just count on one another. Like, if the sister needed her grass mowed, call your brother. If you needed a house maid, call. If you need a babysitter, call your sister. Like, I just wanted this whole big family.
Yes.
I ended up with 4, but my regret was by the time I was 24, I had a tubal ligation.
Yes.
And I regret ever having a tubal ligation, because from a little child, I always wanted a big family. But
Yes.
somehow I believed and I allowed what other people thought. Like, why are you having all these children and you're not even married yet? Because I actually had my children before I met my husband.
Yes.
So by the time I met my husband, I couldn't have any children.
Right.
So that has been like a desire of our whole 20 years we've been together.
So you can see, thank you for sharing that. It's a perfect example of so many different things that played into that. I know I have 3 sons. My husband's from a huge family, and to this day, he mourns the fact that we didn't have more children. Like, that's his childhood story. He wanted a gazillion, so I get that. Yeah, and I'm like, no. We can't feed these. Anybody else? One more person want to share? Anybody?
Well, I wanted to have 3 children as I grew up, because I am the eldest out of 3, and we have an amazing bond, and I'm like, 2 is not enough. What if we
Right.
one.
Oh, yeah.
And I would always think of the worst outcome.
Right.
That's why I'm like,
Three is the perfect
There's
number.
always one, at
Yeah.
least one you can go to and be with. But as I grew up, now given the economy, things are changing in my head because I'm like, I would rather be able to support and fully support one to grow strongly.
Right.
And give them and by support, I don't only mean financial support, but also me being mentally stable enough to be able to support them.
Attention and time. But also you can see in the childhood story how it begins and then how it nuances on too, right? Like how you adapt and go. But still, we still look back at that. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's so many. And oftentimes, one of the things that I hear a lot of when I'm at conferences, especially when I have a table or a booth and we're showing, is because I'm a woman of age, I get a lot of women come by who talk about wishing they were grandparents. That is a role they wish they were filling. That was a dream they had. They never thought anything other than being a grandparent. And we hear that quite often. Okay, so thank you for sharing and thinking about that here. So let's talk about this. Did I go backwards? There we go. There we go. No. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so as previously noted, post-traumatic growth can occur by understanding reproductive grief basics, which is our prompt today, embracing biblical principles for grief, and finding support. So grief basics. I could talk all day about grief. I love grief, but grief is not so basic. Grief and suffering are tricky sometimes, but I love missionary Elizabeth Elliot's simple definition of suffering: having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. Doesn't that sound tough? We can see then how those who grieve reproductive loss are often suffering within their ideal childhood story, a story that is deeply embedded in our understanding of the world. The childhood story in our mind informs us of our potential roles: motherhood, fatherhood, grandparenthood. It establishes legacies. It rights wrongs. Like what you were saying, I need to have all the children, all the siblings, so that we can mow lawns. Like, we're righting wrongs when we dream these things. We're strengthening cultures and traditions. We're building dreams and expectations with myself, in the center of the story, with the power to create a world. So people who struggle with reproductive loss are a vulnerable group. They're oftentimes desperate to hold on to their story or have a baby or not have a baby. My colleague, Tanya, she always dreamed about being a working woman, never dreamed about children, got pregnant when she was 16, and that was not part of her childhood story. And an abortion ensued very soon after because she had to hold on to her childhood story. She couldn't let it go. And so people are often willing to do anything it takes to accomplish that story, and grief ensues, especially when bonding begins before conception, and we begin to grieve the person or persons we may never meet, like my husband with additional children. He bonded with them in his mind, right? So the post-traumatic growth is that theory, as I've mentioned, that holds that people who endure a psychological struggle following adversity can often see growth afterwards. And it explains, the notion is that people will develop a new understanding of themselves, their world, how to relate to others, the kind of future they might have, and a better understanding of how to live life. To encourage this in our patients, we can help them rewrite their story with God in the middle as the central figure, not themselves. I love Glenna Marshall's book, The Promise is His Presence. She writes, when we don't understand why the one who can heal us won't, we must turn our hearts to him anyway. Suffering may be the tool he uses to pin us to his side by sending us to the word. But instead of looking for ourselves in the scripture, for what they might reveal about our potential deliverance, we should fix our gaze on God from whom deliverance flows. So how do we do this? How do we actually do this? So one of the things I'm again, like grief, lament, this is, if you want to ever hang out with me, I'm much cheerier of a person, but I really dig grief and lament topics. And one of my favorite books on lament it's called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy by Mark Vergroop. I highly recommend it for yourself and just in patient care. It's just helpful to help people walk through. When people experience great loss, they often reevaluate their belief systems. This is a good time for us to often share the gospel or help our patient re-engage with God, equipping them with lament language. I don't know if you're familiar with the lament language. The Bible is full of lament, and it's a concept that's a powerful tool. And lamenting gives a voice to our patient's suffering. When we've discussed reproductive loss as disenfranchised before, where the griever has no voice, lament allows us to face and name our pain fully. It creates space for future resolution and hope without glossing over the suffering. It permits us to protest life's difficulties, scream, cry, vent, plead, and complain in the presence of God and others, and it allows our patients to ask those hard questions without judgment. Why did this have to happen? Where is God in all this? And grief, like lament, can be messy and uncomfortable, and sometimes it's hard for us to even make time. I know in your busy professional lives, if you see a patient, or if you're, I think someone here was a receptionist at the desk, that you're seeing it all right there. You don't have a ton of time, but we can be present in it while we can lift our chin and understand it a little better and offer that compassion. And how we can do that best, I think, is by validating and normalizing the suffering. You can become that invitation to heal just by by saying something like, this is hard. You are struggling. I am with you. It's rough, man. It is rough. You are right. And by validating and normalizing, we're also educating on grief. We're also saying this is normal. This is not abnormal. We want our patients to understand this is part of the normal human condition, right? And it's a place where we can be gentle. We don't have to extract a praise or, a testimonial of success from our patient. We can just be gentle and listen, not pressing our patient to count their blessings when right now they're not feeling any. And we can lament with them and cry and pray for and with them on their behalf and sit with them in their pain. And this often comes across as you have to spend an hour, but you don't. One time I was standing in the candle aisle at the Kroger, and a woman came up to me and just started telling me about her husband who had just passed away. And I was able to just pay attention to her for that short, brief time that she was lamenting and giving language and voice to her experience. I love lament because it's also a pathway and a language that helps people to not only deal with the reality of their pain, but can be refocused on the trustworthiness of God. God can be trusted no matter the outcome. Mark Vergroop in Dark Clouds, Deep Mercies writes, lament is the personal song that expresses our grief while embracing God's goodness. We can help our patient find strength and renew their trust in the Lord, and we can comfort them as the Lord has comforted us. So one of the things, another really good book I read many years ago was called, What Everybody Should Know, and it's written by Joe Navarro, who was an FBI agent who did interrogation by looking at body language. And one of the things he talked about was how you as in your body language, we learn to lie from our face down. So for instance, you're a kid and your mom did make you eat broccoli and you made a face, right? You went, and she says, don't make a face. So you learn to tuck in your crazy, like I'm gonna eat this. And so he talks about it, how we learn to lie all the way down. But one of the things that rarely lies is our feet. And I love this so much. This really helped me when I was thinking about how I really am present with people who are grieving. So when that woman at the Kroger came to me, what I didn't do was stand there and shake my leg. What would that give the idea of? I'm in a hurry. I don't want to talk to you in the candle aisle, right? And I also didn't put my foot one way here and one way this way. What does this also tell you? I'm halfway out the door, sister. I can't hear you. But what I can do is I can square my body and I can look at you in the eye. I can turn my whole self. Even when I do, sometimes I do a phone bank, a helpline. Even when I'm on the helpline and someone texts or calls and I know I am on that line, I turn my feet toward my phone. I turn my feet toward my notepad. I turn my feet to that person who is calling or texting and needing 15 seconds of someone who is really listening. That is how I can offer comfort to those people that are coming in with so much hot, right? Like so much hot trauma. I get really passionate about this, sorry. Lamenting is also gives an alternate way of grieving, and that is with hope. Christians can grieve with hope. Through Jesus, we not only experience salvation amidst sorrow, but we also have great confidence that one day our sorrow will be wiped away when Jesus returns, and we walk with God in unbroken fellowship. So in your clinic setting, and I'm sure this is true, that you pray for your clients before they come, while they're there, and when they leave. I'd creep on my patients, as a volunteer, I'd creep on them. It means I'd pray for them after they left. They wouldn't even know, right? But I'd be like that weird person who's always praying for them. But I'd pray for them that they would enjoy spiritual blessings like increased faith. When they walked out the door, I would pray, Lord, just let them see the sun, the leaves, the trees, the flowers, and that they may reflect your glory in their life. I can pray that they're sanctified through their suffering, and I can pray that they're strengthened in the Spirit and filled with the great goodness of God. Simple things to just like lift our head, know a little bit, pay attention, and we can do so much to move them forward. Finally, and this is one of my favorite things of all, is we don't want to leave our patients with little or no follow-up support in this area. I'm sure you are all so busy. You have busy practices. Many of you don't even focus on reproductive loss in your settings, I'm sure. But what I always say is to have maybe three resources, just 3. It can be so easy as that. Maybe one on abortion, adoption, stillbirth, whatever you choose, whatever you're seeing most of. Miscarriage is very common. Or 3 resources on all reproductive grief and loss. And I always say to make them simple, easy to access for your client and for your patient and for you. They're sound, they align with biblical principles, right? We want them to go to somebody who believes like we believe so that they are being comforted in the way that they've come to you, they trust you, so that you want to send them to somebody who believes similarly to you and knows something about reproductive loss. And the organization you refer to responds promptly and respectfully to your patient. That seems like a no-brainer, but I can't tell you the number of times I haven't done due diligence in my referring out and the patient has just gotten lost in the mix. We don't ever want that to happen, especially when it comes to the things of the Lord, in my opinion. So one of the things we're going to take just, again, 1 minute. And I have 2 recommendations right off the bat. One, Reproductive Loss Network. We have a place for you to get started on some referrals. But also, I would like to introduce to you Cheney from her plan. She's out there. She's got a booth. She can connect you to anybody you need in the world ever. So I'm telling you, she's a great resource, and I hope you get a chance to visit her booth back there too. But let's just take 1 minute, and I want you to think about who is in my circle of influence that knows maybe something or someone who can get me to the place I need where I can get those 3 referrals. So just take 1 minute to think about that. That's one thing I would recommend, do your research. It saves you a ton of time. At the top, do it today. Do it tonight when you get home. Once you do it and you know that it's a good, solid, sound, referral, you've got it. We don't want you to have to be like spinning when you're in it, because that's very hard. So always just kind of prepare for it. That's why I say keep it super simple, because too many is too many. But we always talk to, interview people before we refer to them, because I just can't. It's too just heartbreaking. Anybody else on a new thought or a suggestion?
Did you mention resolve through hope?
Resolve through sharing is another. That can offer. There are a lot of really good resources out there. And again, I'd recommend our website and Cheney. Cheney is like great with that. And you can sort by it on her plan. You can sort by state, and it's really great. So great. Okay, so we did that. Here we go. So just to recap, and I want to take questions, and I think we have time for them, but I wanted to today to increase your awareness of the impact of reproductive grief and loss, highlight that post-traumatic growth that can occur by helping your patients understanding reproductive grief and loss basics, embrace biblical principles for grief, and find support. You do hold an advantaged position to help mitigate adverse effects of reproductive grief and loss trauma. And you do it in the biggest picture way of all by helping your patients move from groaning with despair to crying out to God in faith, from despairing of life to seeing God in his grace, and from grieving without hope to worshiping God in their grief, knowing he will make all things new. God truly has provided you. I just want you to know as you're going out today with everything you need for life and godliness through the Word of God, the Spirit of God, and the people of God, you have all you need to help your patients on their healing journey. So I just want, well, thanks for being here today. You guys are rock stars. If there's anything I can help you with or resource you or chat with you later or connect, please feel free. And for those brave ones who want to fill out an eval, I'd love it. Thanks so much.